Welcome into the Hot Read podcast for Tuesday, May the 16th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and I'm joined as always by producer JT. JT, how are you? You're muted.
I'm muted, of course. Lovely start to our Tuesday afternoon here. We're getting a great start here.
Not a great start, but a great show today. We've got an awesome special guest that is waiting behind the wings, so we will make him wait no longer. We can go ahead and bring him in. It's Danny Kelly, our guy who is the senior staff writer over at The Ringer, co-host of The Ringer NFL Draft Show, The Ringer NFL Fantasy Football Show, author of The Ringer's NFL Draft Guide, and co-author of The Ringer's Fantasy Football Rankings. Danny Kelly, what's going on, man? So excited to have you on with us today.
What's up, fellas? How we doing?
Great. We're talking about all of the fun off-season things. You know, this time of year is he's really scraping the bottom of the barrel for content. So we're clinging on to the draft a little bit. We first met you in Indianapolis at the Combine. So our relationship began draft related. And I hit you up and was like, let's talk a little bit of draft. And you were gracious enough to join us today. So that's where we'll start today. We can talk about the Titans draft in particular, which in the grand scheme of things, it started as one of the more boring draft classes and then became one of the more interesting draft classes when they went with Will Levis in round 2. Certainly one that has fans of split mind here in Nashville. Some of them aren't quite happy with the direction, even though this is a team that desperately needed offense and they did draft all offense. But in the NFL and today's NFL, that is, it's like, if it's not wide receiver, people are upset, and it wasn't wide receiver. Right. So let's start with the first guy they went with, Peter Skoronski. Among one of the safest picks, I think, in this draft, but boring for a lot of fans, right? Who wants a lineman in round 1? For this team, you'd think of all the teams whose fan base might actually want a lineman, it might be this one because of how unbearable the pass protection has been for this team for the past 2 years. But alas, folks weren't super happy about it. And it came down to the positional debate, right? Tackle, guard, positional value. So run down a little bit for us your evaluation of Peter Skoronski pre-draft, and then maybe talk a little bit about where you think he may best fit in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of my favorite players in this class, period. He's a really good player, very balanced, very strong, versatile. I think he comes in and he can play either tackle or guard for the Titans. And I think, that versatility, that ability to just lock down a position is going to be very valuable for the Titans. You're right. It's definitely a boring pick. It's especially a guy like Skoronski who, I don't think I could pick him out of a lineup. Honestly, I don't really know what he looks like. I mean, he's exactly. Like a good, watched him, obviously in pads and everything and in a helmet, but not a flashy player.
No,
not like a big ticket item necessarily. So I think, obviously I can understand some of the disappointment, but at the same time, I really like him. I think he's a really good player. And the way that the draft played out in terms of getting Skoronski and then getting Levis also in the second round is almost ideal, honestly, for the Titans, because then they kind of double up. They get a really good player first. I was a little bit nervous, for any team, really, honestly, that took Levis in the first round, right? Because there's just a lot of risk there. But I think taking him in the second round, you get actually a really good amount of value with that pick. And again, like I said, you get Skoronski, who's going to protect for him in the long term. And probably, I think, do a very good job. I had him ranked 6th overall on my board. So, I understand the positional, discussion, whether a guard is worth it at number 11 overall. But at the same time, for a team with the identity that the Titans have, which is balance and smash mouth, and they still have Derrick Henry, it just kind of fits their identity and their philosophy. So I like the pick, actually.
I liked it as well. And the thing that we keep talking about, Danny, is like with a brand new GM, which Ran Carthon is, you're probably with your first ever draft pick looking to maybe not hit a home run, but just hit a double, something that is not going to come back and look horrible for you. And I can't think of a better double in this draft class than Peter Skoronski. And so that makes a lot of sense as to why they ended up going with him. We can talk about Levis because that was the main topic of discussion with this draft class. And it was Titans fans were so tight the night of the draft leading up to that pick because they were terrified. We're in volunteer country here. And so there's an added bias of, it's not just Will Levis might not be a good NFL quarterback. It is, we hate Will Levis as a person. And this is the church of anti Will Levis propaganda around here. And so it's tough to it means more SEC bias out of the NFL evaluation for a lot of folks. And so there were a lot of people terrified of them taking him at 11. And frankly, I think if Skoronski wasn't passed over by the Bears, they probably were thinking about it. That's kind of what they've alluded to. But then ending up with him at 33 overall, just from an objective standpoint, I really can't be upset with that value, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is a guy, I had him ranked 21st. I think he was a back half of the first round type of quarterback. There's some issues I think that are a little bit concerning that would make me a little worried to take him in the top 10, top 5 type of thing. You know, he's a little bit older. His play fell off a little bit in this last season. And so there's some concerns there. You know, he didn't necessarily light it up on the scoreboard in terms of his stats this last season, or really, you know, ever in college. There were some issues with turnovers and things like that, but the traits 100% make him, to me, a back half of the first round guy worth betting on, because he's, you know, 6'4", 229, athletic. And, you know, coming into the draft, it was hard because I kept going back and forth on Levis. On one hand, I wanted to like him. On the other hand, there was some concerns that I had that, you know, just kind of were nagging in the back of my mind. But at the same time, man, he has an insanely good arm. Like his arm.
Oh yeah.
The speed at which he gets it out, the speed at which he releases the football.
It's wild.
Like a short, compact flick of the wrist throw. Absolutely great velocity. It's almost reminiscent of like Aaron Rodgers, the way he throws the football. So I understand why teams liked him, even though, like I said, there's some obvious concerns, but you know, there's traits to work with there. So I think where the Titans got him is almost honestly perfect, because there's now probably not going to be as much of a rush to get him on the field. In theory, you know, unless Ryan Tannehill completely sucks, you know, in 2023, assuming he's the starter, you know, there's not going to be a huge rush to get him on the field. There's not going to be that pressure. You know, the second round is just perfect, honestly. And so you guys can develop him, and hopefully he turns into a starter. And if he doesn't, then it's not the end of the world. So it worked out really well, I think, for the Titans.
I felt like I was taking crazy pills with him the entire draft season, because early on, I remember on y'all's show, Ben Solak talking about like, don't be surprised if a team falls in love with this guy, potential first overall pick. And then you heard that from folks in the media and different teams. And I'm like, that's crazy. And then you hear when we get into the month of March and April, it's like, actually, Will Levis isn't really a first rounder and he's guaranteed to, he's actually just Jake Locker. And I'm like, that's crazy. It's like, we can't, you know, you can't possibly have nuance in today's world. Maybe he's just the fourth best quarterback in a class of 4 good quarterbacks. But I do think that in terms of landing spot, and that's kind of where we'll talk about with the rest of the AFC South in a couple of minutes. I couldn't think of a better situation than him being able to go and sit behind. I mean, my NFL comps for him were like kind of Ryan Tannehill, best case, Matthew Stafford. And for him to come and sit behind Ryan Tannehill, for him as a player, has to be one of the better situations, right?
Yeah, and I comped him to Ryan Tannehill in my draft guide. So,
which is why a lot of people were upset, because they want to get rid of Ryan Tannehill, and they're like, "Don't bring the new one in."
It's just that's hilarious to me, because man, fan bases, and I've gone through this, you know, with the Seahawks over the years, and fans always kind of, the grass is always greener. I think Ryan Tannehill is a pretty good starter. You know, you could be way worse off in terms of starting quarterback. 100%. So, but yeah, I mean, I think stylistically they're similar. I think Levis is going to work best in a system where he has some support around him. They're, you know, run heavy, or at least balanced, and then, you know, play action, throw it deep, explosive plays, let him run around a little bit, because he is pretty athletic. He almost had sort of a Taysom Hill vibe early in his career in college at Penn State.
Yeah, he did.
And so, yeah, I mean, again, there's tools to work with. There's traits to develop. I don't think he's a complete product. And obviously the worry is he's a little old. So is he ever going to get there? But now the situation dictates, and situation's important. We talk about this on our show all the time. Situation's probably the most important.
It's the most underrated part of the whole the process. Yeah.
Like, he's not going to be asked to put this team on his shoulders right away. And that's so massively important. That actually gives him, in my mind, a much better chance of succeeding in the NFL. If he would have come in and was a top 10 pick and everyone's clamoring for him to be the starter in year one, he goes out there, he struggles.
Like it was rumored forever, and he's just, he dies. Then I'm like, there's no shot.
I would have almost zero confidence that he would succeed in the NFL. And now I have pretty strong confidence that he'll at least be a starter in the league. And so, and again, by the way, this like from a, you know, personality wise, chip on the shoulder thing, like maybe he's got this like new, you know, fire under him, and he's been humbled maybe a little bit or whatever. Like there's also some of the personality things that could come into this of him falling. And now he's got that chip on his shoulder and he really wants to prove people wrong. So, yeah, again, I like before the draft, I was like low and you kind of alluded to it, but I think we beat him up a little bit too much throughout the process. He's a better prospect than maybe we were kind of letting on when we were, talking about some of the issues like the bananas, eating the bananas and the mayo, the weird stuff, the mayo in the coffee. Yeah. But like, honestly, I think he has the traits to actually be a starter in the league. And so that's got to be exciting. I think it should be exciting for Titans fans.
The third round pick for the Titans was Tyjae Spears, who it's two different things. Like, this guy's got crazy juice. He also has half the ACLs you'd expect in a running back.
One half of them.
One half, exactly half the quota. That's the benchmark for most teams, right? Is 2 ACLs. But the ACL issue aside, this guy brings juice to an offense that really could use some juice. And so I'm kind of surprised fans aren't more excited about him. I think that they saw that headline. And with the injury PTSD that Titans fans have had from the past 2 years, it was immediate red flags for them. But when you watch the tape from last year, which I know that you did, this guy's electricity in a bottle. Like, he's going to bring something to this Titans offense that they've not had in a long time. Derrick Henry is great, but this guy is completely different.
He feels different to me than anybody that's on that roster too. It's not like Hassan Haskins, Julius Chestnut, whoever ends up being sort of in the rotation at running back. He's totally different from those guys. He is a little bit smaller. I think that's kind of another concern that you have, and why he's probably never going to be, a Derrick Henry guy where you're giving him 300 carries in a season or whatever. Obviously with the knee, that's also an issue, but like, I don't worry too much about the knee. Running back careers are already short.
That's my point. I was told that you're not supposed to sign running backs to a second deal.
I mean, they're not going to sign him to a second deal unless it's like couple million or whatever.
Right.
And so, I don't think you worry too much about that. I think in the short term, like you mentioned, he offers the type of juice. He's a lightning element to complement the thunder that Derrick Henry brings. And, the thing that I noticed first about him, I think the first thing I wrote is that he has lightning quick acceleration, just juice, just burst to make the first guy miss, get out to the edge. He can access, gaps in the line that probably Derrick Henry's a little too slow to get to at this point in his career. So that kind of gives you, it's a change up almost. It's for defenders. It's, they're getting used to Derrick Henry having to take this guy on in the hole. And, that's like a whole different style than what you have to do when you're trying to tackle Tyjae Spears. So I think, just a change up, honestly, in the offense. It's kind of interesting. Plus, he didn't do a ton of pass catching in college, but I saw him at the Senior Bowl and he was very impressive in that area. He was making guys miss after the catch and running routes, and he looked pretty impressive, honestly.
They were lining him up the slot a lot at rookie minicamp this past weekend. They did a bunch of that stuff with him.
Yeah, and I love that about that. And the Titans have could run out 2 running back sets and kind of see how that goes. And so I think he's just another, like, a third round pick is, honestly, just it's not worth a whole lot. Like once you get past the second round, it's like you're kind of throwing darts, honestly. I know third rounders feel like it's higher, but like third rounders are very hit or miss. And so I don't think it's a huge investment in a guy that could bring a little electricity to the offense. And if it doesn't work out long term, that's not the end of the world, because again, you're not wanting to give running backs big second contracts anyway, and a third round pick is not that high of a commitment. So I like the pick. I think it makes sense for a team that has Derrick Henry kind of getting towards the end of his career and probably only going to be in Tennessee for another year. And you got to get some more depth there. You got to get, get another compliment to what you guys have going on there. So I like the pick.
The last draft pick we'll talk about is Josh Wiley, who not a ton to discuss because, it's a really deep tight end class. So he was one of a number of guys that you felt like was a good value proposition on day 3. But on this show, we weren't actually all that crazy about him as a fit for them because they've got Chikakonkwo, who had such a great rookie year, showed that he has that, at least in the receiving game, that tight end 1 capability. And this receiving room is going to be a big part of the receiving game.
Yeah.
They really need somebody who can be that. You put them on the field, you're not quite sure because that's been their problem, right? They've had tight ends that are all or nothing as a blocker or a pass catcher. And when you don't have a guy that's versatile in that way, the defense knows exactly the kind of play coming based on the personnel. And so we were hoping for them to find somebody to be that tight end too, that is a threat in both ways. With Wiley, we just didn't really see a lot of that. He's a big, tall athlete. I think he's going to be a nice guy in short yardage in the passing game, but he's like 6'11" or something. I was standing next to him at rookie mini camp this weekend, and it's like, this dude is he's like lineman tall on this team.
Yeah.
Is he going to be able to even get low enough to be a factor in the blocking game, let alone be heavy enough? I didn't see a ton of that on tape. What did you see?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's a reason guys are 5th-round picks. I don't think he was an elite in either blocking or receiving, but he is a big, tall athlete that, can move around. They moved him around their offense a lot in terms of the formation. He was doing slice blocks, moving around in the backfield blocking. I could see him being pretty useful on the move as a blocker. You know what I mean? Like getting out in space, targeting guys. He was pretty good at that. Sealing him off. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be like a big pile pusher type player. His arm length is a little bit of a concern, I think, as like an in-line blocker, and that could be something that you have to sort of just temper your expectations a little bit. But as a guy who can move around, I think that they can pair him with Chig. Every time he touched the football, it felt like it was an explosive play, and so getting him out in space on screens, running like 12 personnel or whatever, or 21 personnel. 12 personnel or 22 personnel, getting 2 tight ends on the field.
There it is.
It's the off season. I'm rusty, but yeah.
Yes, fair enough. Yeah.
Getting him out in space. I'm talking about Chiggin, and then letting maybe Wiley do some blocking in space downfield. I think there's a lot of things that you guys could do with that. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, a Troutman type of tight end where you're probably not going to expect numbers from him, but he's going to be a utility guy on the offense that just kind of goes out there and does the dirty work. So, there's, like you said, there's not a ton to say about this pick probably. But he's a big, tall, athletic tight end that they could use in multiple ways.
So we've already talked about Levis and his landing spot with Tennessee. Let's look at the rest of the quarterbacks in this draft class. And it's easy for us to talk about that because it's the AFC South and Carolina. It's the ultimate AFC South quarterback arms race now, with Trevor Lawrence being the elder statesman of the new guard, assuming that all these new guys eventually take over, which is exciting. Like, as somebody that covers the Titans and the AFC South, I'm selfishly hoping they all hit so that it's just pandemonium in 2 years. And it goes like full NFC East, the laughing stock in the league, to, oh, now they're the best division in the league. But let's start with Houston and CJ Stroud. It was always Stroud that nobody believes them when they say that. What do you think about that fit? And what do you think about the idea that the owner definitely didn't have any say in who they ended up picking at quarterback?
Oh man, I don't know. It's tough because I've heard both sides of the story, like that it was always their pick and they just did a really good job of hiding it. And I can actually see that, honestly, because Caserio is so just maniacal about that kind of thing. I could see that having actually
he's a sneaky one. Yeah.
So, but I also heard, you heard a lot on draft day that the owner stepped in. I don't know. I would lean that they always had him highly graded and they just did a good job of doing the smoke screen. But and part of that maybe is just me projecting my view of him. I always thought he was the best quarterback in the class, slightly above Bryce Young, just because the worries I have with Bryce Young in terms of his frame. Honestly, Bryce Young's best quarterback, quote unquote quarterback in this class, but I have legitimate concerns about his size. I think that, you'd be a little bit delusional if you don't have actual concerns about how big he is, because he's, an extreme outlier in terms of the history of the NFL. So that worries me. But yeah, I mean, CJ Stroud, to me, very good, accurate passer, good arm, cerebral. He can move around. I think he got beat up a lot during the process for not being able to do things out of structure. But I do think he showed flashes enough for me to know or believe that he can do that in the NFL.
Yeah. Coming
into an offense with Bobby Slowick, the quote unquote Shanahan McVay style offense, I think is a perfect fit for him. I like that they've got some veteran guys around him, and Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz kind of give him a little bit of support early on. Obviously, that's not like an elite pass catching core in Houston, but at least they have the makings of a good offensive line and a few skill players that can kind of just get the job done in the type of offense that he's going to be running. So overall, I'm pretty interested to see what happens with Stroud in Houston. I think it was the right pick for them. I'm glad, that I was a little worried that he was going to fall because it felt like, there was a lot of whispers coming out that the NFL didn't like Stroud as much as maybe I did. So I felt a little bit validated that, I was seeing the same things they were seeing.
Let's talk about, as you all have deemed him on the Ringer shows, future Hall of Famer Anthony Richardson, who I am very high on. And just in the draft process, I mean, there's a whole lot to love, obviously, and he goes to Indianapolis, which in hindsight kind of always made sense with Shane Steichen and what he did with Jalen Hurts.
Right.
But Jacob asks in the comments here, how patient will Indy be with Richardson? That was a pretty tense war room when he got picked. I do wonder, they're a team that is in a position where I think they're going to want to start him early. He's only played 12 games since high school, or only started 12 games since high school. So like he definitely needs the reps, but do you see him being like a decent, I kind of am expecting a Justin Fields kind of season for him, where at the very least with his legs, he'll wow us.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think he's probably going to take his lumps as a passer. I think everybody should be ready for that. Everybody should expect that he'll have some struggles as a passer. Most rookie quarterbacks do. Even the most like refined college passers, I can think back of the last like 10 years, some of the most refined passers in college, like a Trevor Lawrence, for instance, they take their lumps in their rookie season. There's the speed is different. The complexity, obviously the offenses in the NFL are so much more complex, but I do think the landing spot's perfect. And like you said, in retrospect, it makes so much sense that Shane Steichen, would make this pick, or at least want to try and develop this guy. And so, put him on the Jalen Hurts style plan where you have him heavily involved in the run game. That's a very difficult thing for any defense to defend. It gives you a foundation to build your offense on. You got Jonathan Taylor. You can build the run game around that. And then from there, obviously, just kind of get him comfortable as a passer, get him sort of ingrained in the offense, learn the language, and kind of go from there. I would expect he probably puts up a good amount of yards on the ground, scores a lot of touchdowns in the red zone, but his passing numbers are pretty underwhelming, and that would be honestly fine. I think that's just kind of like what we should expect, and not be too worried about it if it does happen that way.
Kenneth, along with a number of Titans fans, have this question, and it's going to be the question for the foreseeable future. We know that the Titans kind of backed off, potentially going up to 3 when Stroud was off the table in Houston, but they could have seemingly gone up to 3 still to get Richardson if they were high on him. Obviously, they were higher on Levis than Richardson. What would you have liked better? Them selling the farm to move up to 3 and take a swing on Richardson as a prospect? Yeah. Or do you like the value of Levis at 33?
If I'm a Titans fan, I mean, obviously it's exciting. It would be very exciting to have a guy like Anthony Richardson in the building. I just worry. I think I would worry a little bit too much that if you give up the farm to move up and get a guy like Richardson, you already don't have a ton of skill player talent. You're kind of in a weird transition season where, building around him quickly would be difficult, and you're giving up a ton of, draft capital to move up there. And so you're almost painting yourself into a corner where, if Richardson struggles early on, things could really sort of snowball against you quickly. So I probably, like, realistically, if I'm being rational, think it was a better move to wait, get Levis in the second round, and long term, you still have, your future picks. You can kind of take this thing slowly.
But it's not as fun to think about, right?
That's for sure. But honestly, the traits wise, obviously right. Richardson is more, elite in every category. But like I said, Will Levis does have pretty exciting traits too. And so they can do some similar things with him. It's just not going to be the most athletic quarterback of all time kind of deal. I think, I probably, if I'm talking rationally, the Titans made the right decision not trying to give up the farm to move up for a guy like Richardson, because there's just a lot of variance with quarterbacks, period. And he's probably more high variance than most guys just because of his lack of experience, in college.
Let's talk about little Bryce over in Carolina. I think I don't know if it was you or somebody else on y'all's Take Purge podcast you did before the draft, but just the idea that Bryce he's going to die in the NFL. That's what I think that what we're all terrified of. And, you see these videos that have come out this past weekend, and he just looks straight up like a Make-A-Wish kid back there behind that offensive line. There's no other way to put it. first of all, do you buy this? He may not be the starter discussion. And also, what do you think he will look like this first season in terms of the landing spot for a first overall pick? Usually worse than this Carolina situation. I actually do like where he ended up landing in terms of how bad it could have been. What are your thoughts on Young?
Yeah, I think in our take purge, I was essentially like, my take was that all the outliers are going to fail because that's why they're outliers. Like the NFL generally avoids guys that are outliers because it's harder for them to succeed. I do think that Bryce Young has some special ability in terms of his vision on the field, his ability to like process what's going on downfield and coverages and where his guys are going to be. Like he can spin away from pressure, spin away like 3 times and still know where everybody is on the board. And so that's like a special trait that he has. But at the same time, he's tiny, he's small, and that shows up in his ability to drive the football. It shows up in his ability to see, over the middle of the field. I think that's going to be an issue that we see with pretty much every small quarterback. You have to find passing lanes. And if it gets too crowded in the middle of the field, he's going to want to bail. And that could be, an issue. And so I don't know. To me, and then I said, this is basically a good, like an offshoot of what we were just talking about with trading up for the farm for a guy like Bryce. This is what the Panthers did. They traded a huge amount of capital to move up and get a guy who's already a outlier. And so that to me feels like it feels like they're doubling down or this is a parlay of sorts where any rookie quarterback is going to be a risk, but now they're doubling that risk because they traded up and all that. And so I'm a little just worried about the situation. That is all. I love Bryce as a player. I think he's really, like I said, he has some special traits in terms of his ability to process, but I do worry about just the physicality being a long-term issue in the NFL. And so, yeah, I'm a little bit worried about that. I think their offensive line is going in the right direction. I think their skill players are not very good, at least right away. So I'm a little bit worried about this. Yeah.
Let's get to some other draft topics, interests, and oddities, just to kind of put a bow on this. On the topic of wide receivers, the middle class of this wide receiver group ended up slipping a lot further than I think maybe we all talked ourselves into them slipping. We ended up having 4 or 5 wide receivers in the first round, which people didn't really see coming. But then it was kind of a desert for a while and everyone fell like a full round. You had, the 2 Tennessee boys and Marvin Mims and all these guys going like the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round. You've got A.T. Perry available in the 7th round. It's like, what's happening? Do you think we just got way too excited about wide receiver as a position in the draft process? Or do you think the NFL has a good reason for being down on this group?
Yeah, I think both probably yes. In terms of we probably got a little too excited about. I think first of all, I was always kind of clear-eyed. I think that there's going to be some contributors, some starters in this group. I actually, I'd still say that there's going to be some very good players that emerge from this draft class in terms of the receiver position. But at the same time, we saw what I was a little bit worried would happen is a lot of these tiny guys fell a bit because they're tiny and they're outliers, and so. This happens every year though. We get the NFL drafts players in a weird order, like the order of which these receivers came off the board.
Right.
Was very shocking to me, honestly. Like Jaden Reed being I think it was the 5th or 6th guy taken.
Michael Wilson, come on down.
Michael Wilson was a 3rd rounder. Josh Downs fell a little bit further than I thought, but that I guess makes sense in retrospect. You kind of, this happens in every draft where you look back and you're like, that kind of makes sense. Like Josh Downs, he's a slot receiver only. He's not as explosive straight line speed as some of these other small guys. And so it kind of makes sense that he went behind a guy like Tank Dell. And Rashee Rice going to the Chiefs in the 2nd round was a big shock to me. So there's always this kind of thing. Jonathan Mingo going that early in the 2nd round was a little bit surprising. The order in which these guys came off the board was a little weird and a little surprising, but it happens. It does happen every year. If you look back at the classes over the last few seasons, like the order in which these guys are taken is always a little bit surprising. So, I think there is a few starters in here. The A.T. Perry thing that you mentioned, I thought that was a weird fall. I was a little surprised he fell in the 6th round. It sounds like he was told, the feedback was that he had some character issues that teams were worried about. He didn't really expound on that, but And I haven't really been able to figure out what the issue there was. But yeah, he was a guy that I had in my top 100. I think he's a good player, and so they get it. I think they got a steal. The Saints got a steal in the 6th round, getting a guy like that. So, but yeah, there's probably more role players than stars in this group, but at the same time, I think there are going to be some pretty productive pros here.
Danny, your Seahawks, I'm very bullish on, and I want to hear your brief thoughts on their draft. They had 10 gajillion picks, of which, of course, they took a running back that everybody's like, why, God, why?
They took 2
in the fantasy community, at least. Like, and walk. Who else did they take besides Charbonnet?
They took Kenny McIntosh in the 7th round.
Okay, well, that is not the most Seahawks thing ever. I don't know what is.
Yeah.
What did you think? I see this team that was supposed to be horrible last year, and then they're a playoff team.
Yeah.
And they kind of don't lose anybody and just add some pieces that I think are going to be really nice. Like the defense still has a lot of question marks, but they were a winning team last year with even more question marks than they currently have. I don't see why this team shouldn't be, especially in a really, really weak NFC. Shouldn't be like a team that people are really fond of. I'm sure you're really excited about this season.
Yeah, I think, the way that things have worked out in the post Russell Wilson era is pretty shocking and crazy, honestly. Like
it is
Russell leaving and immediately
yes.
starting like to completely suck and then giving them a really high pick out of it. The Seahawks absolutely nailing what I think their last 2 drafts. Obviously, we'll see what time will tell what happens with the 2023 draft, but the 2022 draft was extremely good. Got starters in Tariq Woolen, who is like a star immediately. I'm really excited about the Tariq Woolen, Devon Witherspoon or Devin Witherspoon connection or combination. I think that they're very different players, but they both give the team the ability to do a lot of different things in their secondary. And so I think, there's still some worries in terms of what they got up front. Their beef up front is very much a question mark, I think, on defense and their ability to like get after the passer. They have to have some guys take jumps this year to field a good defense, because their defense was really bad last year, or at least very below average. And so, getting the defense kind of going, which has been a work in progress for defensive head coach and Pete Carroll for what feels like a really long time. So hopefully they kind of turn the corner here. They got Bobby Wagner back, which is fan service and it fills a huge need. They went and signed Draymond Jones, which is, I think, a lot of fun. I think he's a good player, up and coming player, ascending player. And so, I mean, I love Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, he was like honestly one of my favorite players in this class, period. So landing with the Seahawks, I think, is great. He's a perfect fit for what they need to do.
Totally.
They haven't had a third receiver, with the Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf combo. They haven't had a third guy step up, in a couple of years. So he could be that guy and give them not only the another guy to like convert third downs and things like that in the short and intermediate area, but just give them more depth and a backup plan if Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf got hurt. Their offense isn't going to fall apart in theory. So I like their draft a lot. The running back pick in the 2nd round, just classic Pete Carroll, classic John Schneider. But that's just what they do. You kind of just have to live with it. But overall, I really liked it.
Right. So speaking of classics here, it's the Falcons going with yet another skill player in the top 10. They go with Bijan Robinson, who is, aside from positional value, which there's a serious debate. I saw somebody have some graphic from like CBS or something on Twitter the other day. Is like, even if Bijan is a Hall of Famer, it was still a bad pick. That's cool. Bijan added to that room just from a fun standpoint, electric. I know that you, as a fantasy guy, very love-hate relationship and mostly hate with the coach down there, Arthur Smith. Yeah. We're very familiar with him in Nashville, of course. What do you think about that fit and the monster squad they put together of just athlete skill players, with the most underwhelming quarterback to helm it all up, who we know the Ben Selects of the world are crazy on, but everybody else is just like, why him? What do you think about that from a real world perspective, but then also fantasy wise? Is he already a top 5 pick? Like he's got to be up there, right?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, so first of all, the Falcons are drafting like they're a Madden franchise or something like that. Just like the most exciting, sexy players in the top
1,000%.
But at the same time, I respect it and I enjoy it and I think it's fun. And we've had a bit on our show that we hate Arthur Smith. And I think we probably have
Right.
gone a little bit too far. We've beaten him up a little bit too much. I think at the end of the day, we probably should have been complaining more about Marcus Mariota because he can't freaking hit a guy over the middle of the field on a seam route. Kyle Pitts is the classic
We're
example.
aware.
Like, yeah, Pitts, his underlying numbers were actually really good. Like he was, I think top 3 in target rate for the tight end position. So obviously we were a little bit bitter because we hyped up Kyle Pitts a lot in the offseason. And then, it felt like they weren't targeting him enough, even though they were technically doing it.
You had more yards than Kyle Pitts this week. Yeah, my favorite bit on your show last year.
Like some random fucking guy. But yeah, I think this year
made up name, not even real.
Literally. I mean, there were weeks where guy I'd never heard of was like outscoring Kyle Pitts. So that was always fun. But at the same time, I do think the way that they're building their offense, you would like to see them have a little bit better situation at quarterback, but they're doing a good job of building everywhere else for, whether it's Ritter taking a jump in year 2, or they end up with a guy in next year, whatever down the line. I think they are setting it up where they have the support system, the foundation in place there offensively to have a good offense. Bijan is a very, very good running back. Drake London, very good receiver, and Kyle Pitts, very good receiver too. I mean, he's more of a receiver than tight end, honestly. And so, I think the skill player talent they have there is really, really fun. And I'm excited to see how it all kind of goes. I really hope Desmond Ritter can just like not airmail a pass over Kyle Pitts' head by 10 yards every time he gets open downfield. Like that's my only hope for this year.
I mean, what we saw from last year, like so far, so good. A little bit, yeah. Like
I think he's better than Mariota. So
maybe I'm with Ben on just the minority here that I think that everything's in place for Desmond Ritter to succeed. He just like needs to do the bare minimum here.
If he's not good with this situation, he's just not good, right?
Yeah.
There's no way.
And
it's a good way. Yeah,
it's
a good way that they can figure out what they have in him too, right? Like it's strategically, this will be their year to figure out if he's the guy. And that's great. That's perfect. That's what you want. You don't want to get stuck sort of like hoping a guy will turn out when you have a team that's ready to compete otherwise. And so they're not putting themselves in that position.
JT, do we want to talk about some fantasy now?
Yeah, let's talk about some Titans fantasy, guys, because of course you always have you have Derrick Henry. Let's just start with him. Of course, every single year, it seems like we say this is the year he falls off a cliff. And then he starts out the year like it happens like clockwork every single year. The first 2 weeks.
Oh, he's dead. He's dead, man. He washed.
Scores like 8 to 12 points and he's washed. We're done. And then Derrick Henry starts to get going and you see him by December. He becomes the RB1 that everybody knew he was going to be at the beginning of the season. And then he ends the season as running back 4. Now,
right?
He's 29 now, and he was running back 4. He's probably his last year here in Tennessee. But do you think that with Bijan and some of these other pass catching guys like Austin Eckler or Christian McCaffrey, does he have an argument to be drafted as a top 3 option this season?
Yeah, I mean. I would put it this way. It would not surprise me if he ends up as a top 3 running back. I'm not taking him because I'm a coward and I'm worried that he's going to fall off a cliff, which is what I've done. This is like refusing to buy.
You are to Derrick Henry what I am to Travis Kelce. I refuse to buy it every year and I get burned every year. So I get it. I really do.
This is like refusing to buy Apple stock in the 90s or something because, I can't go up any higher. But so I probably will be out on him. We have him ranked right now in half PPR as our RB8. Which I think just feels about right. I mean, it builds in a little bit of a cushion in the idea that he could potentially get less volume this year because they drafted a running back. You get maybe Treylon Burks get him going a little bit and they pass a little bit more. They're probably maybe going to be playing from behind a little bit more than you'd want. Although that hasn't really stopped him in the past. So,
also, Danny, counterpoint. Have you seen who he ends the year with? Houston, Seattle, Houston.
Ooh, big playoff implications here. Wow. Week 15 through 17, he plays Houston twice and Seattle.
It changes the math a little bit.
There we go. Against Houston, he's the past 3 years he's scored. I think we calculated on the show like 2,000 yards and 45 touchdowns. Like he just never fails to go off against Tennessee or against Houston.
What was the stat? It was like 200 plus yards in how many ever straight games or something like that. I think it did. He
in
ended
his past 6 games against Houston, he's averaged roughly 200 yards and like 3 touchdowns a game.
It's crazy. So
Which
I
is
mean,
just stupid, but it's a real stat.
if you don't draft him, at least he's a good guy to look at maybe at the trade deadline. If the team who does have Derrick Henry is not doing so
he's going to be the ultimate tampering move, right? It's going to be some contender in your league is going to trade for him in week 15, and it's going to be like, that's not allowed. This person's selling the farm. They're tanking. But it's going to be too bad.
Yeah, I'm already planning for this. This is a great idea. This is a really good strategy. And maybe he'll start slow, and then someone will be like, oh, he fell off a cliff. We knew this was coming. And then as he does, and in the second half of the year, when it gets cold, people don't want to tackle anymore. That's when he does his thing. So, Henry, I mean, look, the guy is an outlier in size, and he's an outlier in a good way. He's the biggest running back in the world. And he's really, really fast. So expecting him to do like what every other running back does is kind of stupid, probably. And that's like that's the conundrum I'm stuck in. But yeah, I think, it's probably worth grabbing Henry.
All right, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, second in the league in rushing with no offensive line and no wide receivers. I mean, I get it, having him at running back 8. I playing in either half PPR, full PPR. I'm someone who is a little
he has to fall apart eventually.
I mean, right? You would think. But he's still someone that I'm going to be.
Do we want to talk about the poor wide receiver room that this Titans team has?
Speaking of the poor wide receiver room, you talked about Treylon Burks. He's so confusing to me. It feels like it may have a little bit of a breakout season loading. We see time and time again these sophomore seasons for a lot of wide receivers, at least fantasy wise, just like come out of nowhere and then just have crazy seasons. Of course, as D Good pointed out at the beginning of this, we picked the worst time because the Titans were doing media availability right now. And as we were talking draft.
The Titans picked the worst time. We had this plan.
Treylon Burks was actually, I picked up bits and pieces of it, and he was talking about how he's been in Nashville all summer all through the offseason. He's changed his diet and said he's been able to run faster because he can breathe better. So it seems like a lot of the asthma and stuff like that has gone away. Do you think that it could be a breakout season for Treylon Burks? And as the wide receiver 1 of the Tennessee Titans, what do you think his ceiling is fantasy wise?
Well, first off, that's music to my ears in terms of like, at least he's saying the right things. You know what I mean? Like last year was a bit of a roller coaster, to put it mildly, in terms of what happened in training camp with, he couldn't just finish one practice, man. Like, for the love of God, please finish a practice.
Tough scene.
It was just like, cause I was a big Burks guy pre-draft. I really liked him. And then it felt like, and my big running joke was essentially like to Vrabel. It was like the joke from Walk Hard. Wrong kid died. Like they traded away. Wrong kid died. They traded away AJ Brown, and then he gets stuck with freaking Treylon Burks, who can't finish a practice. And I think Vrabel immediately like hated him. So that was worrisome, but it did feel like throughout the season, or, from the outside, you guys probably know better than this, or better than me, but like from the outside, it felt like he kind of at least got on Vrabel's good side a little bit more as the season went on.
He totally did. Yeah.
Yeah. There was, I think, snippets I saw where, they were talking on the sideline and Vrabel was hyping him up, and it sounded like, Treylon Burks was working his ass off, at least, from a effort standpoint. So yeah, this is all very good to hear that he is in, he's staying there. He's like working in the off season. He's like trying to get past these conditioning issues that he had clearly coming in. The hope is, and the belief based on what he's saying, is that, he is learning to be a pro, and he obviously was not ready for like the rigors of the NFL when he started last year. Maybe that was a wake up call. And so I'm generally still very bullish on his talent. I think he's a really good player. He's an explosive guy. And I don't know what a number 1 in this offense looks like, but 1,000 yards, like 5 or 6 touchdowns, like this would not be completely shocking.
Can I ask you a question along those lines, Danny?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're the fantasy football expert, right? How do you how do you balance the ideas of when you've got a guy like this who, as a player, you're kind of high on and you think that the ceiling is really promising, and it's like the disconnect of, well, he's in an offense where I'm not sure they're going to throw the ball all that much, and it also might be a bad offense. But then also, who else are they throwing the ball to? Maybe he just gets all of the passes. That's how it was with CeeDee Lamb last year in Dallas, with Ravens receivers over the years. How do you balance those two ideas?
I mean, it's difficult. You just kind of have to. Well, number one, I just looking at the roster now, it feels like the majority of the looks are going to be like Traylon Burks and hopefully Chig Okonkwo, because I think he showed a lot of ability, explosiveness, maybe design the offense around those two guys. And obviously, Derrick Henry on the ground. And then from there, honestly, there's a lot of guys in this depth chart I've not heard of, or I very vaguely know who they are. Like I know who
us either. And it's our job to know who they are.
Yeah. And so it's weird. I think Kyle Phillips is a guy that probably could play a role for them. As a slot receiver, but if they're running two receiver sets, he's probably not going to be out on the field. And so, I think Burks is funnel. He has the ability or the potential to be a pass funnel guy. And so that's exciting from a fantasy point of view. They just don't have a lot of other guys here, even though the offense may be low volume in terms of passing, low scoring, obviously is a little bit of a concern, but I still do have faith in Tannehill. Honestly, I think he's underrated as a passer. And if they can get their play action game going, I think Burks is a perfect fit for that because he's so dangerous down the field and so and run after the catch. So yeah, I think get him on those AJ Brown style plays where he's running a slant, running after the catch, and I think you could get pretty good production out of him, especially if he's in shape and sort of taking it more seriously this offseason. I think the sky's kind of the limit for him. They picked him in the first round. They obviously believe in him. Although I guess now the GM is gone, but still, the wrong kid died.
Yeah, and to that point, there was one more quote today that is just if Treylon Burks isn't under Vrabel's thumb now, I don't know what to tell you. But he came out. I saw one thing on Twitter as we were talking. Burks said, "Yeah, I'm just trying to be fast, physical, and versatile," which is is maybe just Vrabel talking through Treylon Burks there. But
he's had him on the brainwashing machine all off season. He's got him where he wants him.
Love that.
But I see him right now as probably a flex wide receiver 3 with some wide receiver 2 upside because, like you said, this offense is pretty tricky to look at. Someone that I maybe am a little too high on, as you were talking about, Chig Okonkwo, the prince that was promised, as we talk about him on this show. We call him our little prince that was promised. He was someone that he had a career tight end season for rookies as far as that goes. And it feels like no one talks about it enough. He had a 0.35 EPA per target, 7.9 yards after the catch per reception last year, 30 receptions. This tweet came out in February. Warren Sharp put it together. He's up there with, there's been 5 players in the last 5 years who has done stuff like that, with the likes of Jamar Chase, Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown, and another tight end, George Kittle. This guy has the tools to do it. And we were banging on the table all season for Todd Downing to get the ball to Chig, and it did not work. Of course, now that Tim Kelly is the offensive coordinator, and who we found out during the season, he was a assistant to Todd Downing, but mainly was only working with tight ends throughout the week. You hopefully want to see him now maybe have a breakout season. I personally would not mind drafting Chig Okonkwo as a tight end 9 or 10. He's someone that I think could be in the top 10 this season, because I do just
17
believe
touchdowns, 2,100 yards.
Exactly. Just so much of course it's going to be a very deep fantasy draft with a lot of these rookie tight ends who have some promise, but I would not be surprised to see Chig in that tight end 7 to tight end 10 range by the end of the season.
Yeah, I love that. We've got him ranked, I guess, relatively conservatively as our tight end 13, but I share your optimism. Because I mean, again, I'll say every time he touched the football, it felt like it was a 40-yard gain. I don't think, and if you look at the number of 30+ yard gains, he was in rarefied air in terms of his ability to create those explosive plays. You'd think you'd want to get the ball into that guy's hands a little bit more with
You'd think that, wouldn't you?
So, you know, this is what we do. We question what coaches are thinking constantly. And obviously that was what I was doing with Arthur Smith, even though I do recognize and realize he's a good offensive coach. I just think, you know, to me, coaches probably don't make a big enough focus on getting the ball into the hands of like their big guys. Like they want to run their offense. I would say like, just get the ball into the playmaker's hands as much as you possibly can. Like that would be my number one goal as a play caller. So hopefully that happens here. You know, that's music to my ears again that you're saying about Tim Kelly and coaching tight ends, and hopefully that like translates. But yeah, I mean, and this comment here from Jacob in terms of like picking a guy with upside to create explosive plays. He's athletic. This is a big joke on our show. Like every tight end is athletic, but that's not true. There's gray area. Like there's levels to it. And Okonkwo is extremely athletic. He's essentially a big receiver, and getting him out there in space, letting him do his thing after the catch, big physicality. There's a lot to like there, and especially in an offense that is pretty barren otherwise in terms of skill players. And so, yeah, this is like, again, one of those things you look back next year and be like, why didn't we see this coming? Like we probably should have seen this coming. So I think he's a great pick, you know, like in terms of like hoping for that upside.
And to that point, I mean, you saw in the offseason how the Titans were kind of targeting those Chiefs offensive minds to maybe come in here and be that offensive coordinator with a Matt Nagy or something. I mean, it's not too far-fetched to say that they didn't draft a wide receiver mostly because they want to go with like the San Francisco or Kansas City type of style where your tight end 1 plays that wide receiver 2 role in your offense.
Based on what I've heard from inside the building, I mean, that is their plan. They are going to utilize Chig in a massive way in the passing game this year.
Ooh,
and
love that.
We hope to see it. And so that's why I'm so high. Another guy that I'm sneaky high on is Tyjae Spears, the running back that they drafted in the 3rd round. Maybe it's just because I saw him playing in the slot at rookie minicamp and everybody was so mad at it, but I was like banging the table like, yes, this is what I want to see. I think he will be. They've done this in the past with at the beginning of the season last year and in the past with Dontrell Hilliard and guys like that. And that's how they get their offense moving down the field, is just having
Hilliard led the team in touchdowns by the midway point last year. People don't realize that.
I remember
in the red zone, they throw to their running backs in the red zone. I don't know why.
He looks to be a passing game threat. So maybe like a late round grab if you're a guy that wants to play like a 0 RB strategy or something like that. But more so, you talked about him and his kind of role here with Derrick Henry. How much do you think he will be a factor in stealing from Derrick Henry's production? We see him mainly as like a 3rd down back, of course. But do you think that he poses a real threat to Henry's production this season?
I would guess no in terms of a real threat. I think the logical answer would be no, like the way that the Titans have utilized Henry in the past in terms of like, he's the engine of their offense. Like he makes it hard for defenses just because he beats you up throughout a game. You know, I'd say he's still going to be like the high volume type of player, but you know, I think we did see Henry's like explosive play rate, I want to say, like went down pretty substantially last year. You know, maybe they have an idea where they want to keep him a little bit fresher as the year goes on, and really utilize him late in the season. And hopefully that will extend his career, and all those things work together. And I think that's a big reason that they probably made this pick. And so I can see him being a change of pace guy. Maybe they alternate drives and he's not just a 3rd down guy, but I don't know if Henry's healthy, I wouldn't expect like huge volume from Spears, but I do think he's going to be, utilized as a change pace guy / pass catching guy. And, maybe he's worth he might end up being a flexible option just because they're trying to get, some more rest for Henry throughout the season. So I could see that happening, but big volume, probably.
I see that. Yeah. And where my mind is at right now is kind of like 2 years ago, Tariq Cohen for the Bears, kind of like before he became that like main guy last year due to injuries or whatever. But I kind of project him to be that guy that's going to be a threat in the passing game. So if you were like if you trust in PPR and like are a PPR nut and want the receptions, like give me all of them. I think he's a good guy in the later rounds.
Absolutely.
All right, I think that's it for today. So, Danny, thank you so much for your time. Sell what your work. What do you guys got going on at the Ringer right now? I know the fantasy guide just came out, right?
Yep. So we got the Ringer Fantasy Football Draft Guide that is going to be. It's already up. We're going to be adding to it, adding analysis throughout the summer. By the time July rolls around, we're going to have a bunch of profiles up there and a bunch of different functions that we can use that you can use while drafting. Basically, you can like use our rankings and you can check off guys when they get drafted. So it's a very cool system. And then
awesome.
I also have dynasty rankings up there for rookies in terms of, I have full dynasty and rookie rankings up there. If you're playing dynasty, if you're doing rookie drafts this off season, go check those out. I would use that as a roadmap. Obviously, team needs are going to dictate here and there what you want to do, but I think it's a good roadmap for what you want to do there. And yeah, we got the Ringer Fantasy Football Show one time a week during this lull during the off season here. And then we're going to start ramping it up to multiple times a week in July, I believe. So yeah, that's what we got going on right now.
That's awesome. Guys, go check out Danny and all the awesome work that everybody does over at The Ringer. The Ringer NFL podcast content is some of the only content that I live and breathe by. I never miss an episode. They do an awesome job. And truly, it is one of the shows that you can just laugh at, even if you don't care what they're talking about, because these guys are hilarious. So definitely go and check them out. Danny, thank you so much for your time, man. Hopefully we run into you again down the road and have a great summer.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I love all the little tidbits and nuggets you guys have on the Titans. I'm excited about Chig now.
Absolutely. Well, for Danny and producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you again on Friday as usual. Until then, have a great rest of your week.